listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougie Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Hey listeners, so here in Oregon, it's August, and that means it's hot, it's smoky, and it's when I take vacation. Hopefully a vacation without fire smoke, but we'll see. It also means that after today's episode, I won't put out a new one until the end of the month. I'll miss you all, but thankfully, there are 295 other episodes for you to explore until we're back at the end of the month. So when grief first shows up, most of us want to know how to get it to leave. We are not interested in having a long-term relationship with its messy mix of raw emotions, swirling thoughts, and the reality of the absence. But grief tends to have staying power, and our relationship with it goes on for much longer than we hope or expect. Now, long-term relationships do have some benefits. They give us the chance to get to know who or whatever we're in relationship with on a really deep level. And through that process, we also get to know ourselves better. This is sure true in the realm of grief, and it's something that Barri Leiner Grant knows well. When Barri was 28, her mother Ellen died suddenly. Barri was hit with intense grief, but had no time or space to be with it. That's okay though, because grief can be patient, and for Barri, she's had 31 years to get to know hers. One of the things she's learned about her grief is how it tends to get louder each time she crosses the threshold of a new milestone. Becoming a mother, getting a divorce, turning the age her mother was when she died, and most recently, watching her daughter turn the age Barri was when her mother died. Barri is the founder and chief grief officer of the Memory Circle for Grief Support, a place and space she created in 2019 for those learning to live with loss. She left a long-time career as a journalist and mother loss peer guide to pursue full-time work and training as a certified grief coach and educator. Barri's a writer at heart, so she's really skilled at finding the right words to describe grief, something which often feels inexplicable. Well, Barri, thank you so much for reaching out to me, for sharing your experience with listening to Grief Out Loud for so many years, and for now today being a guest.
It's so exciting, such a thrill, and so good to see you. Even though folks can't, I can, and it's really just so nice.
Well, Barri, tell us a little bit about your mom, Ellen.
So my mom, Ellen, was definitely a woman before her time. She died, sadly, in 1993, but there were so many things that she taught me while she was here, including how to deal with some of the tougher things that were happening in her life, which informed mine. One of which was when she and my dad got a divorce before many people were. And I always say she created conscious uncoupling. I don't care what Gwyneth Paltrow says. My mom really made it an effort along with my dad to get along, first just on our behalf, but it really helped to not have to feel like we had some kind of great divide. You know, they were always at all of our events together, and they just made it very warm. We moved on in a way that felt like everybody got like a bigger, better life. 2 houses, they remarried, like everybody got along. It was kind of like a sickeningly sweet divorce, if you will. But it informed my own much later in life when she was not around. I would say also what was interesting is post-decree, she went back to school, she became a realtor, and because we were young at the time, she and her best friend decided that they would job share. And again, this was like before I had ever heard anything like this. And they walked into a local firm and said, we're going to share desk time and we're going to share a business card and we're going to share hours and commissions. and one watched us while the other worked, which was really like cool. So I grew up with sort of this innovative, modern, interesting, breakthrough, dynamic woman who was always more in the doing things. Famously, we were always out of gas. Like she used to say, lean forward, girls, we're running on luck. I think when I was little, I thought that was adventure, but it really was like working mom trying to squeeze in all the things that we had to do at the end of a work day, like last at the mall and last at the beach. And, just it looked like soaking up life to us, which it surely was, but it also was just the way she got it all done.
Barry, as you're describing your mom being kind of innovative and sort of at the front line of that, what felt like a certain genre of single momhood, it's making me think like One Day at a Time, the sitcom from 1,000 years ago, and sort of that whole time period. And I'm curious for you, did that feel like a welcome inheritance, or did it feel like something you wanted to live in opposition to?
First of all, that was our favorite show. So that's the best reference ever. We thought it was all about us. I knew that there was a love between my parents that felt very true and real, and that they still very much loved each other. But that life for my mom in that like thoroughly modern Millie way, kind of like she had big dreams for a career, and my dad had a big career himself, but also very Midwestern ways. And so I think when they met in their 20s, that they couldn't have imagined who they were going to become. And so my mom once shared with me, I fear for the kind of girls that you and your sister, Dana, would have become had I not left. Once a teacher said something about what a shame it was that we came from a broken home. And I didn't even know what that meant. And I went home and it was fourth grade and I asked my mom, and I thought it had something to do with like her real estate because I had never heard that term before. And I was like, why would my mom sell someone a broken house? Or why do we have a broken house? It just sounded like all wrong. And so she marched into school and like made it her business to share with school how she wanted them to treat us, which was really like no differently. If we were okay and we looked stable and we looked like the going back and forth, which was much, much different in those days than it is now, than it was even when I was going through my divorce and how that transpired. But it really did inform that if you look at it as a friendship that you wish to continue, if you can, even for the sake of the children, which she admitted was really the MO at first, but then it was so much easier in so many ways to continue on like that, that I think it avoided a lot of the grief that and pain for my sister and I that we could have had. We just felt enormously loved, and seeing them get along made for a lot of peaceful ways of moving forward in life.
So, on the other side of things, what feels important to share about how your mom died?
Um, my mom took a very well-deserved day off and went to Sandy Hook Beach, which is a beautiful public beach and national park in New Jersey. And she called us all. It was very much like the days that we've been experiencing here. It was like 90 degrees and way too hot to take anybody to see a house. And she called us all. It was very, in retrospect, like she had tucked us each into our place. She had just been to Denver to tuck my sister into a new apartment where she was having, starting a new job. I had a public relations firm and she had come into the city, and we shared like a beautiful dinner together. One later that I thought was so magical that she said, "This is the best pasta I've ever had in my whole life." And you don't think of those things in the moment, of course, but I do now, and it's kind of marvel. But she just fell asleep in a beach chair. She had an aneurysm, and so we know from somebody that was there, that tapped her on the shoulder to let her know that they were the last to leave, and they didn't want to leave her sitting in her chair asleep. And the sun had set, and the woman that tapped her shoulder happened to have been a nurse. and she knew that something was wrong. She couldn't wake my mom. And in 1993, of course, there were no cell phones. So they called and tried to get some help. And by the time she had reached the hospital, she was brain dead. And there was nothing to do to survive the aneurysm at all. And the reason they kept her on life support was that we knew that her wishes were to donate her organs. One of the most incredible parts of that piece of our story is that fast forward to that Christmas and that holiday season, my stepfather, whom she was married to at the time, took my sister and I for a meal. And it was kind of like a horrible, woe is me, trying to make something celebratory out of a really sad time. We were on the sidewalk and we were parting, and he said, I was curious whether or not I should tell you girls this and hesitant to share, but they found early stage liver cancer when they went to donate mommy's organs. And it's one of those pivotal moments in looking back now where I think she was almost saved from a very sad ending. And the one that she had was one that I think she may have written. It was her favorite place on earth. And I recently did this beautiful workshop where people were talking about, like, what are the last sounds you want to hear at the end of your life? And I had never thought about it much, but the last sound my mom heard was the ocean. There's something so beautiful about that and so peaceful about her sudden loss in retrospect.
That's what sparked this question for me, Barry, of your stepfather is telling you that just maybe a few months after your mom's death. Did you have that connection to that narrative of this may have saved her? She may have kind of narrated the end of her own life. Did that happen quickly, or did that take a few years?
Yeah, I was always searching for a why. I couldn't imagine why someone so young and so charitable and so magical in our opinion and so giving, and so many people came to our house to pay their respects and just tell us stories about how she had touched their life. A woman from Brooklyn with like a box of cookies with her arms outstretched, just telling us how my mom helped her like wear red lipstick again, and like after her divorce tucked her into this new condo, and countless stories like that. And I just thought, first of all, how was there enough time in the day for her to be all that she was to my sister and I, know the minutia of our lives inside and out. And so the why was so big, and it really had me in a place where I had lost all faith. I always believed that there was some power in being like a good person. I don't know whether that at the time was God or spirit or just something in the zeitgeist of just being good. And she was the definition of that to me. And I just thought, how is that possible? And when I learned that news, it gave me an answer to part of my why. I think it helped. I think over the years, it has helped even more. And I've looked at it with more clarity. I've written it 100 times over and over again, to the point now where I think perhaps she was given a choice, like here's one way and here's another way. And what would you choose? And when I think of it that way, I think it would be far too soon for her to be without us and to have never been a grandmother and to have been at my wedding, but not my sister's, like all of those things that we imagine that she would be there for. But I don't picture her going through that kind of an ending, just knowing what that might have brought compared to like falling asleep in a beach chair peacefully and here and gone. It sounds kind of poetic in retrospect, but it also may, in fact, she was a beautiful writer. It also may be in fact, something she may have written.
I'm guessing, I don't want to speak for you because you're about to speak for yourself, but my guess is that the first few years of grief didn't feel very poetic. And I'm wondering what those first few years did feel like.
In 1993, I don't recall anybody saying grief or grieving. I think we were tasked with so many things that in retrospect feel unthinkable, like choosing her clothes and my sister and I lamenting over like these shoes or those shoes and these hose or those hose. And does she need a bra? Doesn't she need a bra? And because she died so suddenly, we didn't know any of her wishes. the world thought very much that, to me at the time, that I was an adult. I was 27. I was married. I'd been a big sister for many, many years. And I felt very much that my job was to be a big sister and a mother figure to my sister. We all returned to work, I would say, approximately 2 weeks after she died. And so the example that we had in my stepfather and the other grown-ups around us was, we're just going to try to return to some sense of normalcy. And it was anything but normal. This larger than life person that loved us more than you can imagine was just gone from the planet. And it just felt like it shouldn't spin without her. I remember being Grand Central Station commuting and standing at the top of the stairs, so vivid in my mind's eye, and just wondering, where were all the people going? Like, didn't they know my mom died? And so the inside, like the interiority, was like wanting to scream, because I knew what I was feeling was at odds with the way that the world was treating me about my loss. And because I looked like I had it all together and was running fashion shows in Manhattan and writing press releases, like, things looked pretty normal, I guess, from the outside. And I started getting so much affirmation for, you're so strong and resilient and you're like her and you're, all these messages. And so I just became more of that, because it looked like I was getting a lot of praise and it sounded like what you should be doing. So I just did more of it.
Was there a moment or many moments or a period of time where the exterior view of your life started to match a little bit more the interior experience of grieving for your mother?
Yeah, I was so looking forward to the day where I might have that mother-daughter relationship again and have a child. I couldn't imagine doing it without her, but at the same time, I was so longing for that. I got pregnant with my daughter Emma in 1996, and I woke up and thought, this is amazing. And also, how am I going to do this without her? How am I going to be a motherless mother? And I think that 3 years in is when I realized, you need some support. It felt very dark. It felt like mood and energy and juju that I didn't want to pass on to the baby. And I just felt, I woke up one day and was like, I'm just going to need help. And the help wasn't like how to change a diaper. The help was, find some support for this, is grief I could name. And I think that really came clear for me because in 1994, I had read a book by Hope Edelman that's was a life changer at the time, called Motherless Daughters. I think it is, 31 year anniversary this year of that book. If you had told, 27-year-old me that fast forward, I would work with Hope someday, I wouldn't have believed you. But it's the truth. But in those pages, for the very first time, I met other motherless daughters whose stories informed what I was going through and helped me name it. And I think the idea that a few of those stories included motherless mothers allowed me to know what I was going through.
So it makes me wonder, Barry, if it took 3 years in, well, maybe you said you read the book a year after your mom died, but it took like 3 years when you were pregnant with your first child to be like, whoa, this is, it's like real grief. This is legitimate. And maybe I could use some support. Over the course of 31 years since your mom's death, how do you think about it now? And then the second part to that question is, some folks will think like 31 years, how are you on this podcast talking about your grief 31 years later? I'm not saying that, obviously, listeners, but the world at large might be saying that. And I'm curious what your internal response is to that.
I think because it looked like there was nothing like terribly wrong. I looked so highly functioning. And to me, it was like, well, unless you are, absolutely falling apart and not getting out of bed and like all of these things, like that was what I thought grief might look like. Um, Over time, I've learned like her sudden loss was traumatic. And a lot of my response in having no response to grief was probably a trauma response and being busy in my work. And like so much of what I was learning was going on somatically back then. I can name now looking back. I've also had countless trainings now and sat with dozens of clients that have also continued to inform my own understanding of the different ways that we can meet grief along the long arc, along this long trajectory. And my feeling now is that I didn't know then that we will never get over loss. I knew I would miss her forever, but I feel now I have a much better understanding that we are always and continually learning to live with loss, and what those grief tending tools are along the way have been different at different ages and stages of my life. But what's changed is how I am curious about them, how I meet them with creativity, how they've informed my work, my writing. I think this year, what was so interesting is that my daughter turned the age that I was when I lost my mom at 27. And so we've spent this whole year of her pointing out so many things that feel so affirmational. Like, I really needed you for this. I really can't imagine what it's like. And she was the one that brought it up to me. It wasn't on my grief bingo card that this was going to be like a big milestone or a big event in my life that was helped me process even more grief. But it was almost a beautiful thing that we lived through that together as mother and daughter. And then she turned 28 just last week. And that day was sideswiped me. It just took me out. It was as if my body knew that 28-year-old me, who couldn't have imagined back then, could imagine now what it's like to be in the world with no mom. Like 28, there's no mom. That was like the big feeling of that day. And I always look back. I write to 27-year-old me. I write to that young girl who deserved more support and understanding. I seek therapy. I have a yoga practice, a writing practice. My practices have practices. Sometimes I try them on to help clients because I'm just curious, and sometimes I'm interested to see what's left. Like I I I can shake up the snow globe real good, and I always just imagine that there's still a little bit of silt. Like it's still there. There's still something there that I can discover, uncover, and reveal to myself. So I think it's always a work in progress.
You mentioned, Barry, that on the day that your daughter turned 28 really kind of took you out in a way, and you weren't expecting it. It's not like you had it on the schedule, like here's a birthday or an anniversary that's like on my radar to stir up or shake my grief snow globe, to use your analogy. And because grief is so different for everyone, what does that look like for you to be taken out by a grief wave these days?
I think because I have so much ritual around other days that are on the calendar, the way that I honor my birthday, her death anniversary. Like there's been so much that I've learned over time that really works for me. Mother's Day, and how I meet those days. This one was just not even one that was like at all on the radar. And so when I woke up so sad, like the tears were so close to the edge all day long, and I had this date to visit with my daughter, and we were hanging out doing like an amazing like pop up in the park and like really having a good day. And I needed to cry all day, and I was trying so hard to be happy for her. I think it was more the surprise than the sadness. And really being able to name it, because I thought we were doing it. Like the year that she was 27, I thought between 27 and 28, like we're doing this and we're really good at it. And she's pointing out all these things to me. And I felt like we were really living into it, sort of in the same way that my year between 49 and 50, because my mom died at 50, like that whole year felt like, what if this is all you had left? And I really lived into that and really, but that one I felt like I was really on board. This one, I was like, that's what I mean, sideswiped. It just was as if, I know all about the body keeps the score, but this was like living deeply, deeply, deeply in my bones. And it knew there was some really wise understanding of, I don't know, it made me feel so sad for 28-year-old me. And also what was so interesting is I had a daughter that was old enough to have a conversation with me about what that felt like. And I said to her, and I have no idea what parenting looks like. And I've never been parented past 28. Like, I don't know what this looks like, but let's be in it together. And so even the next day, I felt it still. And I shared it. I shared it on my social media. I wrote about it. Like, I feel like opening a door is the best thing that I can do for others, because in all of the hardship, I never had a mom to go to. I talk to my sister about almost everything. We're extraordinarily close, but sometimes I think if I'm feeling this, others might be. And so let me just open up this conversation and let people know that this might be a little further in their rearview mirror than mine, but this might come, this might happen. Just an awareness and vulnerability that is really the foundation of my work, like how I started doing this in the first place, very unofficially, because it was just like, if I can help one motherless daughter make this not so rough, that'll be good enough.
Well, and it really speaks to all the practices you mentioned earlier that you could wake up on that day, track what was going on for you, make some space for it, witness it throughout the day while still being present during the day, collect yourself enough to narrate it for somebody else, versus what can often happen for folks is someone catches them off guard. They don't know what's going on. It's very disorienting. And then there's a big story around like why I shouldn't feel this way, or why do I feel this way, or shove it down and not experience it at all. And so it seems like that's a big gift of your work, is modeling for other people how to notice, witness, track, and make some space for it in amongst the learning to live with it.
Yeah. And when you haven't prepped for it, or you haven't even known that it was coming, it just felt like a wave that I could not surf. And sometimes I can, sometimes they come and I absolutely can. This just was, yeah, it, like I said, not on my griefy bingo card.
And Barry, I know we're going to talk more about the work that you're doing with the memory circle. Before we head there, though, I want to talk about this other realm of grief that you're currently walking through and navigating, of your father who has dementia. And, I'm curious, how does the grief around that feel similar and not similar to grieving for your mom?
Gosh, thank you for asking. My dad's memory loss is really teaching me a lot. I often weigh what's worse, even though I tell the world and know that comparing the two is just counterproductive. And even within my own grief, that there isn't a grief Olympics, that they're both really difficult for different reasons. We're meeting my dad where he is. And I would say that means accepting the beauty of what remains and loving what's left. But it's slow, and it's the parent that remains. So it's like a loss of both parents. There are days that he doesn't know who we are, and caregiving for a parent is unusual. The person that took care of you, such good care of you, that you're caring for. It's an honor. It really is. At the same time, it's just heartbreaking. Like, trying to grieve a person who is very much alive in front of you is so different than grieving the sudden loss of my mother. And so I'm often at odds with, but he's alive. He's alive. How could I feel so sad? How can I feel so much loss when he's right there in front of me? And yet his sage wisdom, and like there wasn't a contract that any of us have ever signed without him looking at it. There hasn't been like a big event on any of our calendars where he wasn't present, or a beautiful note didn't come from him and his extraordinary penmanship. There's just so many things daily that we miss. Yet there's a gift on so many days that when you show up because of his memory loss, that for him, the past is not a thing. Some days it is. Some days we get a glimmer. The future is definitely not a thing. And so this lesson of being in the present moment with him is really a gift. It's a hard one, and it is one that I have to keep reminding myself over and over again. But being with him right where he is and getting really creative about how we visit with him and how we meet with him. I was really honored to write an article about it for Maria Shriver's Sunday paper, and was so touched by all the feedback that it wasn't so intuitive for others. You know, they had a really hard time not getting back what you put into a conversation. Or, you know, for example, there's a Scrabble board in one of the gathering rooms there. I'm like, whose big idea was it to bring Scrabble into the memory care facility? But we spell out words and our names, and we'll ask him questions about the words and remind him of everybody's names. On Father's Day, I was wearing like a little necklace with my name on it. And I said, hey, Dad, what does this say? And he said, it says Barry. And I haven't heard him say my name in so long. So sometimes like we're getting creative. We've used like Snapchat filters, and we show him movies, and we just, we meet it. Like I said, it's amazing, but with like an openness and creativity that I couldn't have imagined, but it makes it so much easier than avoiding or missing like the normalcy that we understood in the before days. And it happens really slowly. Like all of a sudden you look back and you realize like, oh, that was the last time that happened. Like when you're in it, you don't even realize that that might have been a last. It's hard. It's really a hard one. And I think the other thing that I have learned, there's a great account on Instagram called Dementia Darling. And Carrie Alberts is the woman who runs it. And it took my listening to her call folks who aren't even having someone with dementia in their household, calling us all caregivers. And I think that was another big thing for all of us, that we realize that we are his caregivers. We are his voice, we are his ears, we are his eyes, we're his advocates. And that really helped me understand why it feels so big. It is because I am that, and I am his daughter. So there's part of me that grieves the what was and what could have been. And then there's the part that shows up because I'm his caregiver.
You have me wondering, Barry, about memory for a lot of reasons, right? That your work with the memory circle. And also when I think about when someone has had someone in their life die, there can be such a rush, such an urge, such a longing to capture every memory there ever was. You know, you said after your mom died, people kept coming up to you with stories about her. And I watch people like write them down and try whatever, just hold on to them so tight, understandably. And then you're watching your father lose his memories. So I'm just wondering, in that experience, how has it shifted your relationship to documenting and remembering?
Well, right after I lost my mom, I feel like my knee-jerk reaction was to start collecting everything. She died with very little in the way of stuff. So there wasn't necessarily anything to like to have and to hold. It was before cell phones. So there was like no video and not as many pictures as we have now. And my knee-jerk reaction really was to like start collecting things for my daughters so that they had memories from their childhood and of our time together. So I began to collect, engrave things and date things. And a simple thing like I have this beautiful linen that we put out every year. It's like a vintage runner that has all of this like 1950s art, and it's a birthday runner. And I collected it at a flea market, and every birthday you put it out on the table. And it's just things like that and traditions and keepsakes that have been a big, big part of my life. I wrote books about collectibles. I created doll houses and charm bracelets and the kind of heirlooms, I think, that felt like we didn't have them from my mom. And at the same time, I have so many memories of my mom and all the doing. So I don't know that either one is right or better. I recently told my daughter Emma that she has full permission to like get rid of all of my things. I don't want her to really feel like she has to be attached to them or find a place for them. And they're hard conversations to have, but I think so important that they just keep what has meaning to them. As far as my dad, I remember making a really big video on one Thanksgiving where we knew that he had mild cognitive impairment diagnosis and a real awareness about capturing those memories. So we have a lot on video of my kids. We all call him Grampsy. We have a lot on video of Grampsy because of that, and so many pictures, so many pictures. Thank goodness. You know, the good part of iPhones, I think, when we're not doom scrolling, is that we've just captured so many pictures. Every time we're together, there's something about his hands and my mother's hands that are so vivid in my memory. And so capturing them every time we're together, my hand in his hand, has been just a thing that I've continued to do.
It's a different way of thinking about the progression and how things change. I'm saying that because I'm going back to what you're saying of when you look back, like, oh, that was the last time my dad did this, or that was the last time. So it's almost these memories of progressive loss. But when I think about a picture of the hand, it's just documenting change, and it's kind of neutral in a way.
Yeah, there's just something about me remembering my hand and my mom's hand and her hands on the steering wheel. And like, I just have these like vivid memories of her hands. And so quite often I'll tell, you know, clients that are saying goodbye to loved ones when they know that they're in hospice, or it's like, just take a picture of your hands together. And it always seems to be a memory that somewhere along the way that we all sort of have, whether we remember like a ring that they wore or the way that they held ours, or, you know, now I notice like the spots on his, and that mine are starting to come a little bit more. And now my nephews, who's two, who's been going to visit him since he was a baby and knows nothing but that as being my dad's house. Um, and him putting his hand on top of our pile and adding to it. And so, yeah, I don't know what that is. There's something all about the way we hold each other generationally. There's just something beautiful about that.
Well, Barry, let's talk a little bit about your work with the Memory Circle. You've mentioned clients and the things that you've done. So what do you want to share about the work that you do?
You know, for many years, I was a journalist and worked in publicity, and wherever I would go, I met a motherless daughter. It was almost as if my heart was some kind of a magnet. And, you know, I'd be like at the checkout at the grocery store, and someone would say, "Oh, my mom loved those." And I would hear past tense, and we would have like a whole conversation about mother loss. And that happened so often. And in retrospect, I think like I definitely wasn't listening to the universe tapping me on the shoulder and telling me, like, this is your work. Because the story that I told myself was, as connected to that as I felt, especially after reading Motherless Daughters, that my mom would be sad and pissed if I in any way defined myself by her loss. And so the things that she knew me for as a writer, as a publicist, as a creative, I felt like maybe I would lose my connection. I don't really know. In retrospect, I feel that way. Like maybe I would lose that connection to what she was proud of, had I stepped into other work, or that I would be like the sad girl if I did that kind of work. I started like a peer circle, and around Mother's Day on the Saturday, I started to have these circles where it was an unmothered Mother's Day on the Saturday, where we could honor our mother loss, and maybe on the Sunday wouldn't feel so heavy, or we could spend it for those who had families, that we could spend it in the way that they wanted to spend it and honor us. And people said, can you have a circle for this? And can you have a circle for that? Have you ever thought about having a circle for this? It grew out of seeing a shaman that said, you need to collaborate. And on my way home from that appointment, I had been a solopreneur and entrepreneur for so long and a freelancer. I was like, I don't even know what that really would look like, what that would mean. And on the way home, I just thought, well, there was one person I knew that had a podcast. I thought it was super fascinating. She was a friend of my sister's from college. I sent an email into the ether and got like a response right back, like a boomerang. And at the very end of their intake form, it said, is there anything else you want us to promote? And out of my fingers, having never searched it, looked at it, Googled it to see if anybody else was using it, the memory circle. It just came to me. And it feels like a culmination of keeping memories alive of loved ones, but also group work. I don't know, by the time that podcast came out, I had had my first formal circle and signed up for my first training as a grief educator and coach. My trainings have trainings at this point, but the circle did grow. And now I see clients one-on-one and offer retreats, grief retreats, and deal with death and non-death loss in circles, and have added supporting caregivers who are experiencing the kind of grief that I'm experiencing around my dad. I took my journalism background and felt that using writing in my circles has sort of become a signature. I've been fascinated by the science about what it looks like when we write to heal.
Do you want to share a smidge about some of that science about writing to heal, even though folks are tuning in and listening, but in case you want to like stop listening to this podcast and go write something?
I think what's the most interesting is that, especially when we write by hand, we use a different part of our brain that responds in healing. So I tell folks that even if all you're doing is coming to the page and moving your hand across the page, that there is great healing and kind of that bilateral movement. And also when you write it down, it sort of frees up cognitive space. And so there's rewiring of the brain, there's creating new neural pathways. It can change the way that we organize our story in our brain. And I also think the idea of seeing it on paper, of seeing it outside of yourself, can give you a different perspective. You could be your own story witness. And it can bring voice, I think, to things that are really hard to find words for verbally. And sometimes there's nobody to tell. So I think it's also very therapeutic in that you sit down next to yourself and see what it is that's on the inside. And there's an entire Right to Heal protocol that's part of like a study that James Pennebaker did through his expressive writing. Sometimes you would think that it's counterintuitive to like write right into the thing that brings you the most distress or sadness. But again, it is moving it to the outside that helps you make space, reframe, and sort of rewrite and rewire, the pain sort of lifts and lightens. It's almost like moving it somewhere else. It's like taking a big moving van, if you will. And I always say, like, the journal is a repository. It's a place to lay things down. So when it feels really heavy, I always say, where can you put it? And to me, it's always on the page. I do lots of prompted writing with clients. I do Write to Heal protocol over time. It's a 4-week process. I think getting in touch with the story that is your grief is also really interesting. And writing to loved ones, I think, is the other way that I can use it to help folks create a continuing bond. And so if you're finding ways of not only remembering a loved one, but I always say the word remember is like the idea that you're putting yourself back together. And we do that over and over and over again in our grief, that we can remember us and them in bringing them into our day to day. So I always say to use a prompt like, my daughter's graduation from college was coming up, and there was another event where my mother was not. And so instead of like that heavy lamenting, even though it was super sad, it was very far along in my years of grief, but at the same time, it was like another big event that she was missing. And so I came to the page, dear mom, if you could see Emma graduating today, cum laude, like, I bring her into the story, and I encourage that too. And so it's not for like the next great memoir, but it's just for you. So it never needs to be witnessed. It doesn't matter about grammar. It can be any way in which you could just move from what's on the inside to the outside. But also, our body doesn't know the difference between cellularly of our loved ones being earthly or otherwise. And so I think it's really incredible to try to make that cellular connection when we write to them, much different than writing about them. There's so much that it helps quell anxiety and lift depression. And yeah, hundreds and hundreds of studies have been done. And so again, some people say I'm not a writer, and I say, if you're writing, you are a writer.
Well, Barri, thank you for, in such a succinct way, sharing a little bit about the research of writing and how helpful it can be in grief, but also just giving us some clear examples from your own experience and even that prompt, listeners, that you can perhaps utilize. So I always put everything in the show notes, but is there anything quick you want to share with listeners about where they can easily connect with you?
I am real fast in my DMs. So if you want to connect with me on Instagram, I love to meet you there in the DMs and in comments. And I think the best part for me of the Memory Circle is just that it's this beautiful interactive place where we can meet and exchange and see each other along this long arc. So again, my rearview mirror might just be a little further up the road than yours, but we can all help one another. Nobody should do this alone. I know that I hear that over and over again on your podcast, how important it is to just find somewhere where you can find support or mirroring or company. It can be terribly lonely. So meet me on the gram or on my in my website. There's lots of free resources also. So never let that also be a deterrent. Scholarships are available. If I can help in any way, I feel like I'm just an email or a DM away.
Well, Barri, thank you so much for coming on the show, for sharing about your mom, Ellen, with me and with our listeners, and for the broad perspective I think you've really provided for us today about that loss over time and how it continues to have an impact and continuing to learn to live with it. So thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much. I love that you've met my folks.
And listeners, I say this each and every single time, but thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's dougy.org. That's our main website as well, where you can find information about Dougy Center's local programming, all of our free downloadable resources, and each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. Excited as always to share that this podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.